The Galactic Council's emergency session had been in chaos for 3 standard hours. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, telepathic pulses, and electromagnetic frequencies that the universal translators struggled to keep up with. At the center of their heated debates stood a single holographic display showing surveillance footage that had shaken the very foundations of everything they thought they knew about humanity. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valkyrian Empire adjusted his crystalline exoskeleton nervously as he watched the footage for the 100th time. The scene was simple enough: a small human child, no more than 7 solar cycles old according to their intelligence reports, standing in what appeared to be a garden on the human colony world of New Terra. She held a collection of native flowers in her tiny hands, their purple and gold petals swaying gently in the alien breeze. But it wasn't the child or the flowers that had caused 3 neighboring systems to request immediate military intervention. It was what lay coiled around the massive oak tree behind her. The Shadowmaw dragon stretched nearly 50 meters from snout to tail, its obsidian scales reflecting the twin suns like liquid darkness. Each scale was the size of a dinner plate, harder than battleship armor, and capable of deflecting plasma rounds that could melt through reinforced steel. The creature's 6 legs, each ending in claws that could shred a hover tank, ripped the earth with casual power. Most terrifying of all were its eyes, twin pools of molten amber that held an intelligence older and more alien than anything the galaxy had encountered. Shadowmaws were not merely dangerous predators. They were extinction events with wings. The first recorded encounter with a Shadowmaw had been during the Third Expansion War, when a Terrellian mining convoy had accidentally awakened one from its 1,000-year hibernation cycle. The results had been catastrophic. 17 ships destroyed, 3 moons rendered uninhabitable, and an entire star system evacuated. The creature had simply fed on the energy from their fusion reactors before disappearing into the cosmic void, leaving behind only radiation signatures and terror. Since then, the Galactic Council had established Protocol 7. If a Shadowmaw was detected anywhere within 100 light-years of inhabited space, all ships were to retreat immediately and the system was to be quarantined indefinitely. No exceptions. No negotiations. No contact. The humans, apparently, hadn't received that memo. The biometric readings are confirmed, announced Dr. Yilith, the Arcturian xenobiologist whose 4 eyes never blinked in sync. The specimen matches all known characteristics of a Class Omega Shadowmaw. Estimated age, between 800 and 1,200 standard years. Threat assessment, planetary extinction level. A wave of nervous chittering swept through the assembly. Several representatives from the smaller systems had already begun drafting evacuation orders for their border colonies. "How is this possible?" demanded General Foss, his mechanical voice synthesizer struggling to convey the cybernetic collective's incredulity. "The humans have been on New Terra for only 18 months. We specifically chose that system for their colony because it was deemed completely safe. Our deep space scouts surveyed every asteroid and moon within 50 parsecs." Ambassador Zethkri manipulated his holographic controls, zooming in on the massive creature. The Shadowmaw's position suggests it has been in that location for an extended period. Notice the way the vegetation has grown around its coils; those root systems indicate at least 20 years of undisturbed growth. The creature was already there when we approved the human settlement. The implications of this revelation sent another wave of panic through the chamber. If their deep space surveys had missed something this significant, what else might be lurking in the systems they considered safe? "We need to evacuate the human colony immediately," declared Counselor Rendai, her telepathic voice causing several sensitive species to clutch their heads in pain. "Protocol 7 is clear. No civilization should be within 100 light-years of one of these creatures. The evacuation fleet is already being prepared," Admiral Corvas reported, his tentacles dancing across multiple control surfaces simultaneously. "We can have the first rescue ships there within 48 standard hours. Given the human population of approximately 12,000 individuals, we estimate complete evacuation within wait." The voice came from an unexpected source, Ambassador Elena Rodriguez, the human representative who had been conspicuously quiet during the entire emergency session. She was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching the shoulder height of most other species, but her presence commanded attention in a way that size never could. "Before we panic and abandon an entire colony, perhaps we should examine the situation more carefully." General Foss's optical sensors focused on her with mechanical precision. "Ambassador Rodriguez, with all due respect to your species' remarkable adaptability, this is not a situation that calls for human optimism. We are discussing a creature that could theoretically consume the energy output of your entire star. Elena smiled, and something in that expression made several representatives unconsciously step backward. General, before we joined the Galactic Council, my species lived on a planet with creatures that could kill us in hundreds of different ways. Bears that could tear us apart with their bare hands. Sharks that could bite us in half. Microscopic organisms that could shut down our entire nervous system. We didn't run from them. We learned to coexist. This is hardly the same situation, Ambassador Zethkri interjected. Those creatures were native to your world. This is a shadowmaw. The mathematical probability of survival when in proximity to 1 is. Let me show you something else, Elena interrupted, manipulating her own holographic display. The image changed to show the same garden scene, but from a different angle and timestamp. The recording was older, approximately 6 months based on the temporal indicators, and showed the human child approaching the massive dragon for what was clearly not the first time. The assembly watched in stunned silence as the little girl walked directly up to the creature's massive head. The shadowmaw, which should have incinerated her with plasma breath or torn her apart with its claws, instead lowered its head to her level. The child reached out with tiny hands and gently touched the creature's snout, just below its nostril openings. This is not a first contact scenario, Elena explained calmly. This is a relationship that has been developing for months. The child's name is Lucy Chen, daughter of 2 of our agricultural specialists. According to her parents, she discovered the dragon shortly after the colony's establishment and has been visiting it regularly ever since. Dr. Yelitha's 4 eyes finally achieved synchronization as they all stared at the display. The behavioral patterns suggest impossible. Shadowmaws are solitary creatures. They don't form attachments to other species. They barely tolerate their own kind. Maybe they don't tolerate other species because those species run away screaming, Elena suggested. Lucy didn't know she was supposed to be afraid. To her, it was just a large, unusual animal that seemed lonely. The chamber erupted in a dozen different forms of protest and disbelief. Species that had never agreed on anything found common ground in their certainty that the humans had either gone completely insane or were somehow faking the footage. Admiral Corvas raised his voice above the commotion. Even if we accept that the creature has somehow developed a tolerance for the child's presence, this does not change the fundamental danger. Shadowmaws are not pets. They are cosmic forces barely contained in biological form. One moment of irritation, one unexpected sound, one change in its chemical balance, and that's exactly the thinking that has kept the galaxy locked in a state of perpetual fear, Elena countered. You see a monster. Lucy sees a friend. Which perspective has actually resulted in violence? She advanced the recording to show more recent footage. The dragon was lying on its side now, its massive bulk creating a living hill in the garden. Lucy sat against its neck, reading from what appeared to be a paper book, a quaint human custom that had baffled xenoanthropologists for decades. The creature's breathing was slow and rhythmic, its eyes half-closed in what could only be described as contentment. The psychological profiles are unprecedented, admitted Dr. Yelith reluctantly. But, the risk is exactly what we make it, Elena said firmly. You want to evacuate 12,000 humans because you're afraid of what might happen. But, what if, instead of running away, we tried to understand? What if this dragon isn't the monster we've painted it to be? What if it's just as lonely and misunderstood as the rest of us? Counselor Mrendai's telepathic signature radiated skepticism. You're suggesting we base interspecies policy on the interaction between one child and one creature. This is hardly sufficient data for it's more data than we had when we declared them extinction-level threats, Elena pointed out. Every piece of information we have about shadowmaws comes from military encounters where someone was shooting at them first. We've never tried peaceful contact. We've never tried understanding. We've only tried running and hiding. The debate continued for another hour, with various species presenting statistical analyses, historical precedents, and mathematical models that all pointed to the same conclusion: the humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and the line between the two was often invisible until after the fact. Finally, it was General Foss who posed the question that had been lurking beneath the entire discussion. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador Rodriguez? That we simply ignore Protocol 7 and pretend this isn't happening? Elena's smile returned, and, this time it carried a weight of certainty that made several representatives distinctly uncomfortable. I'm proposing that we send a research team to New Terra. Not a military fleet. Not an evacuation force. A small group of xenobiologists, behavioral specialists, and cultural anthropologists. Let them study the interaction between Lucy and the dragon. Let them try to understand what's really happening there. And if the creature decides it's tired of being studied? Admiral Corvas asked. If it determines that the additional attention is unwelcome? Then, we'll have learned something valuable about Shadowmaw behavior, Elena replied. But, if we're right, if this creature is capable of forming peaceful relationships with other species, then, we might be on the verge of the greatest breakthrough in interspecies relations since the formation of the Galactic Council itself. The chamber fell silent as the representatives considered the implications. For generations, they had built their policies around fear of the unknown, around the assumption that anything they didn't understand must be hostile. The humans were suggesting something far more dangerous: hope. Ambassador Zethkri was the first to speak. The Valkyrian Empire would be willing to provide xenobiology experts for such a mission, provided adequate safety protocols are maintained. The Arcturian Science Collective has several behavioral specialists who would find this opportunity intellectually stimulating, added Dr. Yilith. One by one, other representatives began to voice cautious support for the research mission. Not because they believed it would succeed, but because the alternative, living in ignorance and fear, had begun to seem even more terrifying than facing the dragon itself. As the session finally adjourned and the various species began planning their contributions to the expedition, Elena remained behind to watch the surveillance footage one more time. On the screen, little Lucy was now braiding flowers into a crown while the massive Shadowmaw watched with what appeared to be genuine interest. Elena thought about all the times in human history when fear had nearly prevented them from reaching out to something different, something unknown. The first human to approach a wolf had probably been called insane by their tribe. The first person to domesticate a horse had likely been warned about the dangers of trusting such a large, unpredictable animal. But, humans had a peculiar gift for seeing potential where others saw only threat. They had a talent for looking at something that could kill them and wondering if it might prefer to be friends instead. In 3 days, the research expedition would depart for New Terra. In 1 week, they would arrive to study the impossible relationship between a human child and a creature that had been the stuff of galactic nightmares for centuries. Elena turned off the display and headed toward her quarters to begin preparing her own report. As the human ambassador to the Galactic Council, she had access to psychological profiles and historical data that the other species didn't. She knew things about Lucy Chen that she hadn't shared during the emergency session. Lucy wasn't just any human child. She was the daughter of Dr. Sarah Chen, one of Earth's leading experts in interspecies communication, and Dr. Marcus Chen, a xenopsychologist who had spent his career studying the emotional needs of non-human intelligences. Lucy had been raised from birth to see the universe not as a collection of threats to be avoided, but as a community of individuals to be understood. More importantly, Lucy had been born with a rare neurological condition called mirror touch synesthesia, which allowed her to literally feel the emotions of other living beings. For most children, such a condition would be overwhelming, but Lucy had learned to use it as a tool for empathy that transcended species barriers. If anyone could form a genuine emotional connection with a creature as alien as a Shadowmaw, it would be Lucy Chen. The question wasn't whether the child could safely interact with the dragon. The question was whether the rest of the galaxy was ready for what that interaction might reveal about the nature of intelligence, emotion, and the possibility of true understanding between vastly different forms of life. Elena smiled as she walked through the empty corridors of the Council station. In her experience, the universe had a way of presenting exactly the challenges that civilizations needed to face, precisely when they were ready to grow beyond their current limitations. The galaxy was about to learn something new about itself, whether it wanted to or not. The research vessel Harmony's Edge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Terra system with all the grace of a falling brick. Captain Jorik Vashan, a grizzled cetacean whose species had mastered space travel while humans were still discovering fire, watched his instrument panels with growing concern. Every sensor array was screaming warnings about massive energy signatures emanating from the third planet. Those readings can't be accurate, muttered Dr. Vexai, the Arcturian xenobiologist whose 4 eyes were currently focused on 4 different data streams simultaneously. If they're correct, the energy output from that dragon is approximately 3 times what our models predicted. Professor Elena Rodriguez stood at the bridge's observation deck, watching New Terra grow larger in the viewport. Unlike her fellow researchers, who had spent the entire journey buried in theoretical preparations and safety protocols, she had used the time to study something far more practical, the personal logs that Lucy Chen's parents had been transmitting to Earth. "The readings are accurate," Elena said quietly. "The dragon isn't just tolerating Lucy's presence. It's actively engaging with her on an emotional level. That kind of deep psychological connection requires enormous amounts of neural energy in a creature that size." Dr. Kethmore, the expedition's lead behavioral specialist, flickered through several color phases, his species equivalent of nervous laughter. "You're suggesting that a shadow maw is actually expending energy to maintain an emotional bond? That's anthropomorphizing on a massive scale." "Is it?" Elena turned from the viewport to face the assembled team. "We've spent centuries assuming that emotional intelligence is somehow unique to humanoid species. But what if we're wrong? What if the capacity for complex emotional relationships is actually more common in the universe than we thought?" Captain Bashan's sonar array pulsed twice, a sign that he was processing something difficult. "The colony administrators are requesting that we maintain a distance of at least 10 kilometers from the settlement until they can arrange a controlled introduction. Standard first contact protocols." Elena shook her head. "Captain, with respect, this isn't first contact. The dragon and Lucy have been interacting for months. If we treat this like a military operation, we'll change the entire dynamic. We need to approach this as guests, not invaders." "Ambassador Rodriguez," Dr. Vexhai interjected, his tone carrying the weight of galactic authority, "I understand your species' tendency toward optimism, but we have safety protocols for a reason. A single miscalculation could result in the deaths of everyone on this ship. And a single act of distrust could destroy the most significant interspecies breakthrough in galactic history," Elena countered. "We have a choice here. We can approach this situation with fear and caution, measuring everything in terms of threat assessment and risk mitigation, or we can approach it with curiosity and respect." Professor Zektul, a crystalline being whose entire body served as a complex computational matrix, chimed a series of harmonic frequencies. The universal translator converted his thoughts into words. "The mathematical probability of successful peaceful contact remains extremely low regardless of our approach. However, the potential benefits of success are significant." Elena moved to the communications console and opened a channel to the colony's administration center. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, Lucy's mother and the expedition's unofficial liaison with the dragon. "Dr. Chen, this is Ambassador Rodriguez. We're requesting permission to approach the settlement directly. No intermediate stops, no military escorts, no weapons systems active. We want to meet your daughter and her friend as equals, not as a potential threat." Sarah Chen's expression was a mixture of relief and concern. "Ambassador, I appreciate your approach, but you need to understand the situation here. Lucy has been preparing for your arrival for weeks. She's excited to introduce you to what she calls Shadow, that's her name for the dragon. But Shadow is protective. If the dragon perceives any of you as a threat to Lucy, the results could be catastrophic. What do you recommend?" Elena asked. "Come unarmed. Come in small groups. And, most importantly, let Lucy make the introductions. She's the only one Shadow trusts completely." Captain Bashan's sonar pulsed rapidly, the cetacean equivalent of raising objections. "Dr. Chen, our safety protocols require that we maintain." "Captain," Elena interrupted, "what if we compromised? A small shuttle, minimal crew, standard diplomatic protocols instead of military ones?" The debate continued for another 20 minutes, with various team members raising concerns about everything from atmospheric contamination to potential psychic interference from the dragon's neural field. Finally, it was Dr. Vexhai who proposed the solution that everyone could live with, if not entirely embrace. "A 3-person advance team," he announced. "Ambassador Rodriguez as our diplomatic representative, myself as xenobiology specialist, and Dr. Kethmore for behavioral analysis. The rest of the team remains in orbit until we establish whether peaceful contact is actually possible." 2 hours later, Elena found herself piloting a small atmospheric shuttle through the azure skies of New Terra. The planet was beautiful in a way that defied the sterile descriptions in their survey reports. Rolling hills covered in alien grasses that shifted from green to gold in the wind, twin moons visible even in the daylight sky, and an overall sense of peace that seemed to contradict everything they knew about Shadow Maw behavior. Energy readings are increasing exponentially, Dr. Vexhai reported from the sensor station.
Whatever that creature is doing, it's directing massive amounts of power toward emotional processing? I've never seen neural patterns like this.
It knows we're coming, Dr. Kethmore observed, his coloration cycling through deep purples and blues.
The question is whether it perceives us as guests or invaders.
Elena guided the shuttle toward the colony's landing pad, a small cleared area surrounded by the prefabricated buildings that housed New Terra's 12,000 human residents. But it wasn't the settlement that captured her attention as they descended. It was the massive shape coiled around what had once been a small hill approximately half a kilometer from the main residential area. The Shadow Maw was even more magnificent than the surveillance footage had suggested. Its scales caught the light of New Terra's twin suns and reflected it back in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. The creature's head, easily the size of their shuttle, was raised and turned in their direction, amber eyes tracking their approach with obvious intelligence. And, sitting cross-legged beside one of the dragon's massive front talons was the smallest member of the diplomatic party, Lucy Chen, age 7, wearing a flower crown and holding what appeared to be a hand-painted picture. The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper, its engines automatically cycling to standby mode. Elena could feel the tension radiating from her colleagues as they prepared for first contact with a creature that could theoretically destroy their ship with a single breath.
Remember, Elena said quietly, we're not here to study a monster. We're here to meet a friend.
The shuttle's airlock cycled open, and Elena stepped onto the surface of New Terra. The air was warm and carried the scent of unfamiliar flowers and something else, something that her enhanced senses identified as ozone and copper, the electromagnetic signature of massive neural activity. Lucy Chen was already running toward them, her flower crown bouncing with each step, her face bright with excitement. Behind her, moving with deliberate slowness, came the most dangerous creature in known space.
Ambassador Rodriguez. Dr. Vexhai. Dr. Kethmore. Lucy called out, somehow having memorized their names from her parents' briefings. I'm so happy you came. Shadow has been waiting to meet you. Elena knelt down to Lucy's eye level as the child skidded to a halt in front of her. Hello, Lucy. Thank you for inviting us. We're very excited to meet Shadow too.
Dr. Vexhai and Dr. Kethmore flanked Elena, their instruments discreetly scanning both the child and the approaching dragon.
The readings they were getting made no sense according to everything they knew about Shadow Maw psychology.
The creature is curious, Dr. Kethmore reported quietly.
Not aggressive, not territorial. Genuinely interested in making contact.
Lucy looked up at the towering form of the dragon, which had stopped approximately 10 meters away and lowered its massive head to ground level. Shadow says you're scared of him, but he doesn't understand why.
He's never hurt anyone. How do you know what Shadow is thinking? Dr. Vexhai asked gently, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution.
Lucy tilted her head in a way that reminded Elena of her own childhood.
I can feel what he feels. When he's happy, I feel warm inside. When he's lonely, I feel sad.
Right now, he's excited but also nervous because he wants to make a good impression.
Elena exchanged glances with her colleagues.
Mirror-touch synesthesia was rare enough in humans, but the possibility that it could work across species barriers was something that xenopsychologists had only theorized about.
Would it be okay if we approached Shadow slowly? Elena asked. We'd like to say hello properly. Lucy's face lit up with excitement. Yes.
But let me go first and tell him that you're friends. The child ran back toward the dragon, her small form dwarfed by the creature's immense bulk. Elena and her team watched as Lucy placed her tiny hands against the dragon's snout and seemed to have a conversation that required no words. The dragon's eyes focused on the three visitors, and Elena felt something that she had never experienced before, the sensation of being examined by an intelligence that was both completely alien and deeply familiar. There was wisdom in those amber depths, but also loneliness and a profound curiosity about these strange new creatures who had come to visit.
It's safe now, Lucy called.
Shadow says you can come closer, but move slowly so he doesn't accidentally step on you. The next hour passed in a blur of careful introductions and cautious observations. The dragon allowed each member of the research team to approach and even touch its scales, though it was clear that its primary focus remained on Lucy. The child served as both interpreter and intermediary, explaining the visitors' intentions to Shadow and relaying the dragon's responses back to them. He likes the way your colors change, Lucy told Dr. Kethmore, who had unconsciously shifted to calmer blue and green tones.
He says it's like watching music.
Shadow says your sensor readings are tickling him, she informed Dr. Vexhai.
He doesn't mind, but he wants to know why you're measuring his thoughts. Most remarkably, the dragon seemed to understand the concept of scientific study and actively cooperated with their tests. When Dr. Vexhai requested permission to take neural readings, the dragon positioned itself to provide optimal sensor access. When Dr. Kethmore wanted to observe its emotional responses, the dragon demonstrated a range of feelings from contentment to curiosity to what could only be described as amusement. The cognitive complexity is unprecedented, Dr. Vexhai whispered to Elena during a brief break in their observations. This creature's brain structure is more sophisticated than our most advanced artificial intelligences. It's not just sapient, it's operating on intellectual levels that we barely comprehend. Elena nodded, but her attention was focused on something else entirely. She was watching Lucy interact with Shadow, noting the unconscious synchronization of their movements, the way the child's emotional state seemed to reflect the dragon's, and, most importantly, the obvious affection that flowed between them. This wasn't just interspecies communication. It was genuine friendship. As the day progressed and the research team's initial measurements confirmed what they had scarcely dared to hope, that peaceful coexistence between humans and Shadowmaws was not only possible but already happening, Elena found herself thinking about the broader implications. The Galactic Council had spent centuries building policies based on fear and assumptions. They had classified entire species as threats without ever attempting meaningful communication. They had created barriers and protocols and safety zones, all designed to keep different forms of life safely separated from each other. But, here, in a garden on a human colony world, a 7-year-old girl had accomplished what centuries of galactic diplomacy had deemed impossible. She had looked at the most feared creature in known space and seen not a monster, but a friend who needed companionship. Dr. Chen, Elena said as Lucy's mother approached to check on the afternoon's progress, I need to ask you something. How did you know this would work? How did you know Lucy would be safe with Shadow?
Saracen smiled, and Elena recognized the expression she had seen on countless human faces throughout history, the look of a parent who understood their child better than anyone else ever could.
I didn't know, Sarah admitted. But I knew Lucy.
She's always been able to see past the surface of things to find the person underneath. When she told us she had made friends with a dragon, we had two choices, panic and try to stop her, or trust her judgment and see what happened.
And you chose trust.
We chose love, Sarah corrected. Love for our daughter, faith in her abilities, and hope that the universe might be a kinder place than our fears suggested. Elena looked back at Lucy and Shadow, who were now engaged in what appeared to be a game involving the careful arrangement of colorful flowers and patterns around the dragon's massive talons. The sight was so peaceful, so fundamentally right, that it challenged every assumption she had ever held about the nature of intelligence and the possibility of understanding between different forms of life. Tomorrow, she would transmit her preliminary report to the Galactic Council. She would recommend that Protocol 7 be suspended and that formal diplomatic contact be established with the Shadowmaw species. She would suggest that perhaps it was time for the galaxy to stop defining other species by their capacity for destruction and start recognizing their capacity for connection. But tonight, she would sit in a garden on New Terra and watch a human child teach the most feared creature in the galaxy how to make flower crowns. The universe, Elena reflected, had a remarkable sense of humor. And an even more remarkable capacity for hope. The emergency recall message reached the Harmony's edge at 0347 ship time, 3 days after Elena's preliminary report had been transmitted to the Galactic Council. Captain Vashan's sonar array nearly overloaded from the intensity of the hyperspace transmission, and the priority codes attached to the message were the highest he had seen in 30 years of service. Dr. Vexhai's 4 eyes moved independently as he processed the contents of the message, each one focused on a different section of the Council's response. They're sending a battle fleet, he announced, his usually calm demeanor cracking with disbelief. 47 vessels from 12 different species. Estimated arrival time, 6 standard days. Elena felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. What kind of battle fleet? Everything, Captain Vashan replied, his cetacean voice carrying harmonics of distress. Valkyrian dreadnoughts, Arcturian science vessels equipped with quantum disruptors, cybernetic collective assault platforms.
This isn't a research expedition anymore, it's a full military response.
Dr. Kethmore's coloration had shifted to deep reds and blacks, the equivalent of panic in his species.
They think we've been compromised. They think the dragon has somehow influenced our judgment.
Elena moved to the communications array and pulled up the council's response in detail.
What she read there made her blood run cold.
The official determination was that the research team had fallen under xenological psychic influence and that their reports were contaminated by non-human mental manipulation. The council had voted unanimously to implement Protocol 9, immediate military intervention to contain and neutralize the threat. Protocol 9 had been used only twice in galactic history, both times resulting in the complete sterilization of entire star systems.
They're going to kill Shadow, Elena whispered. They're going to kill him, and Lucy, and everyone else on New Terra because they can't accept that their assumptions were wrong. Down on the planet's surface, completely unaware of the approaching catastrophe, Lucy Chen was teaching Shadow how to paint. The dragon's massive talons were surprisingly delicate instruments when applied to the art supplies that the colony's fabricators had produced. His current masterpiece, a swirling pattern of blues and greens that seemed to capture the essence of New Terra's twin moons, was spread across a canvas the size of a small building.
"You're getting really good at this," Lucy said, carefully mixing another shade of purple for her own much smaller painting.
"But I think Shadow would look better with some yellow highlights."
The dragon's response came not in words but in the warm feeling of amusement that Lucy felt whenever her friend was happy. Shadow had learned over the months to modulate his emotional broadcasts so that they didn't overwhelm the small human, but their connection had grown stronger and more sophisticated as time passed. What neither Lucy nor the approaching battle fleet understood was that Shadow was not just one dragon. The Shadowmaw species did not reproduce in the way that most galactic civilizations understood reproduction. They were quantum entities, capable of existing across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. What appeared to be a single creature was actually a collective consciousness representing hundreds of individual minds linked across space and time.
Shadow was not just connected to Lucy.
Through the quantum entanglement network that linked all Shadowmaws, he was connected to every member of his species across the galaxy. And, for the first time in millennia, those connections carried something other than loneliness and territorial aggression. They carried love. The implications of this revelation were spreading through the Shadowmaw collective like wildfire.
Dragons that had slept for centuries in the cold depths between stars were awakening to examine this new possibility.
Ancient beings that had never experienced positive emotional feedback from another species were suddenly overwhelmed with the sensation of genuine friendship. It was causing changes that the Galactic Council's mathematical models could never have predicted. On Zirion Prime, a Shadowmaw that had been terrorizing shipping lanes for over 200 years suddenly stopped its attacks and began approaching vessels peacefully, apparently seeking some form of contact. On the rim worlds of the Andorian Empire, another dragon had taken up residence near a mining colony and was actively protecting the workers from asteroid storms and solar flares. The galaxy's most feared predators were exhibiting behavior that defied everything science thought it knew about their species. Elena realized this as she monitored the incoming reports from across known space. The transformation wasn't limited to Shadow, it was happening everywhere Shadowmaws existed. Lucy's friendship with one dragon was somehow influencing the entire species through channels that no one had ever suspected. "Captain," she said urgently, "we need to get back to the surface immediately. And we need to contact every ship in the battle fleet before they reach New Terra."
"Ambassador, our orders are to maintain safe distance until our orders are about to start an interstellar war," Elena interrupted. "The Council doesn't understand what's happening here.
They think they're dealing with one rogue dragon, but they're actually about to attack a species that's trying to make peaceful contact with the entire galaxy." Dr. Vexhai looked up from his sensor readings, his 4 eyes wide with something approaching terror.
"Elena's correct.
The quantum signatures I'm detecting suggest that the dragon on New Terra is somehow connected to massive energy patterns throughout this entire sector.
If the battle fleet attacks, they'll trigger a response from every Shadowmaw in the galaxy," Elena finished.
"Not because the dragons are aggressive, but because they're trying to protect what might be their only chance at ending millennia of isolation." The shuttle bay of the Harmony's edge had never seen such frantic activity. Elena and her team loaded emergency communications equipment, diplomatic protocols, and, most importantly, detailed recordings of their interactions with Shadow and Lucy. If they were going to prevent an interstellar catastrophe, they needed to reach the surface and establish direct communication with both the approaching fleet and the Dragon Collective.
The atmospheric entry was rougher than usual due to the electromagnetic storms that Shadow's increased neural activity was generating.
The dragon's emotional state was becoming more agitated as his species-wide awareness detected the approach of the military vessels. They found Lucy and her parents in the colony's community center, surrounded by emergency supplies and looking confused by the sudden burst of preparation activity around them.
"What's happening?" Sarah-chan asked as Elena burst through the doors.
"The colony administrators are talking about evacuation protocols, but no one will tell us why."
Elena knelt down to Lucy's eye level, trying to find words that a 7-year-old could understand for a situation that most adults couldn't comprehend.
"Lucy, there are some people coming here who are scared of Shadow.
They think he might hurt you, so they want to take him away."
Lucy's face scrunched up in the way that children's faces do when adults say something that makes no sense.
"But Shadow would never hurt anyone. He's my friend. Can't we just tell them that?" "We're going to try," Elena promised.
"But first, I need you to ask Shadow something very important."
"Can you ask him if he's connected to other dragons? If there are more dragons like him who might be listening to what we say?"
Lucy nodded seriously and ran outside toward the garden where Shadow was waiting. The massive dragon had been growing increasingly restless as the day progressed, his amber eyes frequently turning toward the sky as if watching for something that only he could detect. Elena and the research team followed Lucy outside and watched as the child placed her small hands against the dragon's snout. The conversation that followed was unlike anything they had previously observed. Instead of the gentle emotional exchange they had grown accustomed to, this communication seemed deeper and more complex.
"Shadow says yes," Lucy reported after several minutes.
"He says there are lots of dragons, and they're all connected like one big family. And he says they're all scared because something bad is coming."
Dr. Vexhi's sensors began registering massive energy spikes across multiple dimensional frequencies. The quantum entanglement network is activating on a scale I've never seen. Whatever communication system the Shadowmaws use, it's operating at maximum capacity. Elena activated her emergency communicator and attempted to raise the approaching battle fleet.
The response came immediately. Admiral Corvas's voice filled with military authority and barely controlled fear.
"Ambassador Rodriguez, you are ordered to evacuate immediately. Our long-range sensors are detecting massive energy buildups from multiple Shadowmaw signatures across this entire sector. The threat level has been upgraded to extinction class." "Admiral, you're misinterpreting the readings," Elena said desperately. "The energy buildups aren't weapons preparation, they're communication. The dragons are trying to coordinate a peaceful response to your approach."
"Ambassador, with respect, your team has been classified as compromised. The creature has clearly affected your judgment. Our orders are to secure the system and neutralize all Shadowmaw threats." Elena looked at Lucy, who was still maintaining contact with Shadow. The dragon's emotional broadcasts were becoming more intense, and even Elena could sense the growing distress radiating from the massive creature. "Admiral, before you do anything irreversible, let me transmit something to you. Real-time footage of the actual threat you're responding to." Elena activated her recording device and focused it on Lucy and Shadow. What the battle fleet's command crew saw was a small human child gently stroking the snout of the most feared creature in the galaxy while the dragon responded with obvious affection and trust. "As you can see," Elena continued, "the threat assessment was incorrect. This dragon has been living peacefully with human colonists for months. It has formed emotional bonds with our children. It has demonstrated artistic creativity, intellectual curiosity, and a capacity for friendship that suggests we've fundamentally misunderstood this species." There was a long silence from the battle fleet before Admiral Corvas responded. "Ambassador, even if what you're showing us is accurate, it doesn't change the tactical situation. Our sensors indicate that approximately 47 different Shadowmaws are converging on this system. That represents enough destructive potential to sterilize every inhabited world within 50 parsecs." Elena felt her heart sink as she realized the full scope of what was happening. Shadow's peaceful breakthrough was causing other members of his species to seek similar contact, but their approach would be interpreted as an invasion fleet by the military vessels. "Lucy," Elena said urgently, "I need Shadow to do something very important."
"Can he contact all the other dragons and ask them to stay away? Can he tell them that coming here right now might cause a fight?"
Lucy looked confused.
"But they're not coming to fight.
They're coming because they want to make friends like Shadow did.
They're lonely too." The tragic irony of the situation struck Elena with full force.
For the first time in galactic history, the Shadowmaws were attempting large-scale peaceful contact with other species, but their approach was being interpreted as the prelude to an extinction-level attack.
Shadow understands, Lucy said after another moment of silent communication.
He says he'll try to explain to his family, but they might not listen.
They've been alone for so long that they don't understand how to be careful about making friends. Dr. Kethmore's coloration had shifted to deep purples of resignation.
Even if the dragon can convince some of his species to withdraw, the battle fleet won't distinguish between peaceful and aggressive approaches.
The moment those Shadowmaws enter weapons range, Protocol 9 will be implemented.
Elena activated every communication channel simultaneously: the battle fleet, the Galactic Council, and the colony's emergency broadcast system. If she was going to prevent an interstellar war, she needed to reach every decision-maker simultaneously.
This is Ambassador Elena Rodriguez transmitting on all frequencies.
I am declaring a formal diplomatic intervention under Article 12 of the Galactic Accords. The situation at New Terra represents not a military threat, but a first contact scenario with profound implications for interspecies relations.
What I am transmitting to you now is documentation of the most significant breakthrough in xenological history.
A human child has established emotional communication with a Shadowmaw dragon, and this connection has triggered a species-wide desire for peaceful contact. The Shadowmaws approaching this system are not attacking, they are attempting to establish diplomatic relations. Elena paused, knowing that her next words might determine whether the galaxy took its next step toward universal understanding or descended into a conflict that could destroy multiple civilizations.
I am requesting 48 hours to demonstrate that peaceful coexistence is possible.
48 hours to prove that our fears have been based on misunderstanding rather than genuine threat. 48 hours to show that the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy might actually be the key to the most important alliance in galactic history. The response came not from the battle fleet or the Galactic Council, but from Shadow himself. The massive dragon raised his head toward the sky and released a sound that no human had ever heard before, a harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Across the galaxy, 47 other Shadowmaws heard that call and understood its meaning. It was a message of patience, of hope, and of the possibility that loneliness might finally come to an end. The first interstellar diplomatic crisis involving the Shadowmaw species had begun. Whether it would end in understanding or catastrophe would depend on whether the galaxy could learn to see monsters as potential friends, and whether love could prove stronger than fear.
The 48 hours that followed Elena's diplomatic intervention became known throughout galactic history as the Long Wait. Across 47 star systems, battle fleets held position while their crews struggled to comprehend reports that defied everything they thought they knew about reality.
On New Terra, Lucy Chen sat in her garden with Shadow, completely unaware that she had become the focal point of the largest diplomatic crisis in galactic history. To her, it was simply another day of teaching her friend new games and learning about the strange way that dragons saw the universe. Shadow says the other dragons are confused, Lucy reported to the assembled team of xenobiologists, diplomats, and military observers who had gathered around them. They've never felt happy feelings from other people before, so they don't know what to do with them.
Elena knelt beside Lucy, watching the massive dragon's amber eyes track the movement of military shuttles in the sky above them. Shadow's emotional broadcasts had grown more complex over the past day, radiating patterns that Dr. Vexai's equipment could detect but not fully interpret. Can you ask Shadow to show us what the other dragons are feeling? Elena requested. It might help us understand how to communicate with them.
Lucy placed her hands against the dragon's snout and closed her eyes in concentration.
What happened next would be recorded by every sensor array in the system and analyzed by xenopsychologists for decades to come.
Shadow's consciousness opened like a flower blooming, revealing not just his own thoughts and feelings but those of 47 other Shadowmaws positioned throughout the galaxy. Each dragon's mental signature was unique, but they all shared the same fundamental experience: millennia of isolation suddenly pierced by the warm light of genuine friendship. Dr. Vexai's 4 eyes went wide as his instruments registered the quantum entanglement network operating at maximum capacity.
The complexity is incredible.
Each dragon is not just an individual consciousness but part of a collective awareness that spans the entire galaxy.
They're sharing Lucy's emotional connection across spacetime.
For the first time, the research team understood the true scope of what they were dealing with. The Shadowmaws weren't just dangerous predators, they were a galaxy-spanning civilization that had been trapped in isolation by their own power and the fear of other species. Lucy's friendship with Shadow hadn't just changed one dragon, it had given hope to an entire race that had forgotten what hope felt like. Above them, Admiral Corvus's flagship Stellar Justice maintained its position at the edge of the system, weapons powered but not targeted. The Admiral found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a battle fleet against an enemy that was actively trying not to fight. "Sir," reported Commander Thex, the ship's tactical officer, "we're receiving transmission requests from 17 different Shadowmaws. They appear to be asking permission to approach peacefully." Admiral Corvus had spent 40 years in military service and had never encountered a situation like this. His training told him that the approaching creatures were extinction-level threats that needed to be neutralized immediately. His experience told him that enemies didn't usually request permission before attacking. What's the assessment from the diplomatic team planetside? Ambassador Rodriguez reports that the dragons are attempting to replicate the peaceful contact achieved with the human child. They want to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. The Admiral's tentacles writhed in patterns that indicated deep mental conflict. And if we're wrong? If this is some kind of elaborate deception? Then, we'll have the same result as if we attack preemptively, Commander Thex observed. The difference is that one approach gives us the possibility of avoiding a war that could destroy half the galaxy. Down on New Terra's surface, Lucy was growing tired from maintaining the complex mental connections that Shadow was facilitating. The strain of serving as an emotional translator between species was beginning to show in her small face. "I think the dragons want to come visit," Lucy announced, looking up at Elena with the simple directness that only children possessed. "But they're scared that the ships will shoot at them." "Can you tell the ships that they're friends?" Elena activated her communicator and spoke directly to Admiral Corvus. "Admiral, I'm transmitting coordinates for a meeting location in the outer system. The dragons are requesting formal diplomatic contact. They understand that their size and power are frightening, so they're offering to meet in open space away from inhabited worlds." "Ambassador, even if their intentions are peaceful, we have no protocols for this kind of contact. How do you negotiate with creatures that could destroy entire star systems?" "The same way you negotiate with anyone else," Elena replied. "You start by listening." What followed was the most unprecedented diplomatic session in galactic history. One by one, Shadowmaws approached the designated meeting coordinates, their massive forms dwarfing the largest battleships in the fleet. But, instead of aggressive posturing or territorial displays, they maintained respectful distances and broadcast complex harmonic frequencies that the universal translators gradually began to decode. The dragon's first coherent message was simple: "We have been alone. We do not wish to be alone anymore." Lucy, connected through Shadow to the entire gathering, served as an unlikely ambassador between species. Her childlike directness cut through millions of years of accumulated fear and misunderstanding. "They say they're sorry for scaring people," Lucy translated for the assembled diplomats and military commanders. "They didn't know how to be gentle because no one ever taught them. But they want to learn." Dr. Yilith, the Arcturian xenobiologist who had initially argued for immediate evacuation, found herself completely revising her understanding of Shadowmaw psychology. The behavioral patterns suggest that their previous aggressive encounters were defensive rather than predatory. They were protecting themselves from species that attacked them first. The revelation transformed the entire context of galactic history. For centuries, various civilizations had classified Shadowmaws as monsters because every encounter with them had involved violence. But no one had ever considered that the violence might have been a response to being shot at rather than an indication of inherent aggression. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valkyrian Empire was the first to formally propose a revolutionary concept: what if we established permanent diplomatic relations with the Shadowmaw Collective? What if instead of avoiding them, we learned to coexist? The negotiations that followed lasted 6 standard days and involved representatives from 47 different species, 47 different Shadowmaws, and one 7-year-old human girl who served as the emotional bridge between two vastly different forms of consciousness. The final agreement, known as the New Terra Accords, established the Shadowmaws as a recognized civilization with full rights and protections under galactic law. In return, the dragons agreed to formal protocols for interspecies contact and established Shadow as their official ambassador to the Galactic Council. But the most significant moment of the entire diplomatic process came not during the formal negotiations, but during a quiet afternoon when Lucy was teaching Shadow how to make friendship bracelets from the native flowers of New Terra. Elena was documenting the process for her final report when Lucy looked up at her with the serious expression that children wear when they're about to say something important.
Elena, Lucy said, I think Shadow wants to give you something. The massive dragon lowered his head toward the small group of humans and aliens gathered around Lucy's flower garden. With delicate precision that belied his enormous size, Shadow reached out with one talon and gently touched Elena's forehead. The contact lasted only a moment, but, in that instant, Elena experienced something that no human had ever felt before, the complete emotional perspective of a Shadowmaw. She felt the vast loneliness that had defined their species for millennia, the hope that Lucy's friendship had awakened, and the overwhelming gratitude they felt toward humanity for seeing past their fearsome appearance to recognize their capacity for love. When Shadow withdrew his talon, Elena found tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from the profound joy of truly understanding another form of consciousness. What did he share with you? Dr. Vexai asked quietly. Elena wiped her eyes and looked around at the assembled representatives of different species who had gathered to witness this historic moment. He shared what it feels like to finally come home. The new Terra Accords were ratified by the Galactic Council 3 months later, ushering in a new era of interspecies relations that prioritized understanding over fear. The Shadowmaws became valuable allies in galactic exploration, their vast intelligence networks helping to identify and prevent conflicts before they could escalate into wars. Lucy Chen was awarded the Galactic Medal of Peace, becoming the youngest recipient in galactic history. When asked during the ceremony what she had done to deserve such recognition, her answer was characteristically simple: I made friends with someone who needed a friend. Shadow took up permanent residence on New Terra, serving as the Shadowmaw ambassador to the Galactic Council. His presence transformed the small human colony into a major diplomatic center, where representatives from across the galaxy came to learn about peaceful interspecies relations. The garden where Lucy first met Shadow became a protected cultural site, preserved as a reminder that sometimes the most important breakthroughs in galactic civilization come not from military might or technological advancement, but from the simple human ability to see potential friendship in the most unlikely places. Years later, when Lucy had grown into a renowned xenodiplomat in her own right, she would often return to that garden to visit with Shadow. They would sit together among the flowers, a young woman and an ancient dragon, sharing the comfortable silence of old friends who had helped change the galaxy simply by caring about each other. Elena Rodriguez, by then, the Galactic Council's Director of Interspecies Relations, would sometimes join them. She would watch Lucy and Shadow together and marvel at how the universe had conspired to place exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to prevent what could have been the most devastating war in galactic history. The last entry in Elena's official report on the New Terra incident contained a simple observation that became the foundation for all future first contact protocols: the most dangerous assumptions we make about other species are often the ones that prevent us from discovering how much we have in common. Fear is a choice. Understanding is also a choice. The galaxy became a better place the day we chose understanding. In the garden on New Terra, under the light of twin moons, a human girl and a dragon who had bridged the gap between species continued their friendship, proving every day that love truly was stronger than fear, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the most profound consequences. The universe, as Elena had long suspected, did indeed have a remarkable sense of humor. And an even more remarkable capacity for bringing the right souls together at precisely the moment when their friendship could change everything.